Let's talk about coastal policy, my favorite subject. So I'm going to throw a math equation at you. I don't have a whiteboard for you, but we're going to go through it together. So we're introducing a coastal tax. It's a federal property tax, and it's calculated as follows. So Fs minus T divided by dy plus 1 squared. We're going to explain what each of those things is. So F is the fee, which is a monetary dollar amount. So we could set it at $10,000, we could set it more or less. S is the square footage of either the property or of the buildings on the property. And there's two ways you could calculate that. You could calculate it as say h squared plus s, and h in that case would be the square footage of the house itself, and then s would be the total property. So you could do a weighted valuation where you say, essentially, whatever's on the top of this equation, the Fs stuff, is going to make this fee bigger. So we're talking about $10,000. If you have a square foot property of, let's say it's 1,000, however we calculate that, maybe it's the total square footage of everything, maybe it's the square footage of the housing, the buildings, but 1,000 square feet times whatever that F number is, that fee, you could end up paying $1 million in property tax every year, which is a lot, right, for 1,000 square feet, whatever that is. And then minus T. So T is plant biomass. So let's say you own a property and the property is just a bunch of trees. It's a forest. You own a forest, essentially. Then we're incentivizing biomass. We don't want someone with the English lawn, the Palace of Versailles, where everything is just grass. If you have a forest, if you're essentially protecting a forest, we want to incentivize that. And so, on average, a small tree, 20-foot tall tree, weighs about 1,000 pounds. So if you have a property, and let's say, again, that we're saying that the fee is $10,000 per square foot. Well, if every square foot you have a tree, you have as densely packed forest trees as much as possible, then you could easily have, per a 100 square foot area, you could have 1,000 pounds of tree or more. Really big trees can weigh, I think, up to like 2 million pounds or something obscenely large, sequoia trees or something. So if you have some really big trees on your property, you could theoretically whittle that tax down. So that's essentially your plant biomass. And, you could calculate if you have shrubberies, if you have other sorts of things. We're not really going to be counting grass here. And then you have the bottom of the equation. So that's the top. It is, you've got some fee based off the size of the property, and then you are subtracting plant biomass. So essentially, if your property is just basically a forest, then we're going to subtract that. So it's incentivizing putting trees on the property. And then on the bottom half of the equation is dy plus 1 squared. So the d here is the distance from the coast. So let's say the distance is 0, and it's from the edge of the property line. So from the coast to the closest part of your property, however it's shaped. It's not from the center of the property, it's from the edge. So if your edge is right on the coast, that's 0. So it would be 0 times y plus 1. So in that case, again, if it's 0, then it's 0 plus 1 is 1, 1 squared is 1. And so that wouldn't do anything. But essentially, the larger we make d and the larger we make y, the larger the denominator is, the less the tax becomes. So y here is the number of years owned, and two ways of calculating this, right? You could just say, well, how many years have you owned the property? If you just bought it yesterday, you're going to have a higher tax than if you've owned it for 50 years. But you could even do it ancestrally. You could say that if this property has been in your family's name for 100 years, from grandfather to grandson, then you could go back to when your grandfather bought the property 100 years ago. You could even do it ancestrally in the sense of, let's say this was a property that was originally bought in the 1800s, and then it was sold, and then other people bought it, but you want to go back and buy that property. Your property tax could be tied to that ancestor from the 1800s. So that's an idea. Be interesting to play around with that. But essentially, to give you an example of what this looks like, so let's say, again, the fee, let's make the fee really small. Let's start the fee off. And the fee could also be dependent upon the year, so this can be a tax which increases year over year. So let's say the fee starts off at 1, and you've got a small property. Let's say your property is 10,000 square feet in total, in the total property. And we minus T, which is the plant by it. Let's say you don't have any trees on it. It's just a big flat property. And so we've got 10,000 so far divided by, it's on the water's edge, you just bought it, divided by 1. And so you're going to be paying $10,000 a year in this federal property tax. Let's say, on the other hand, it is 10 miles, or not even 10 miles, let's say it's 9 miles from the coast. Let's say it's 9 miles from the coast, and you've owned it for 1 year. So you just bought it, it's 9 miles from the coast. So if it's 9 miles, 9 plus 1 is 10. 10 squared is 100. So you divide that 10,000 by 100, and you come up with $100? Yeah, you're going to pay $100 in this federal property tax because your property is 9 miles from the coast. Now, if it's even farther away from the coast, let's say it's 99 miles from the coast, 100 squared is 10,000, so 10,000 divided by 10,000 is 1, so you pay $1 in property tax. Anything beyond that doesn't really matter, right? So essentially, once you're 99 miles from the coast, unless you just have a gargantuan property, unless you've got millions of square feet here, then you're not going to be paying much in tax. And yeah, that's essentially the concept. I don't know if I'm going to put this up on the main channel. I just wanted to get the idea out there, put out the idea for posterity.